This video is brought to you by EAPFoundation.com, the website for all your academic English needs. So this video will answer the question, what is academic vocabulary? First we'll look at a definition of academic vocabulary. The second part will be word lists, with a couple of digressions, first into something called vocabulary shift, and also general words with academic meaning. After that we'll consider why academic vocabulary is important. We'll see an example text, and study the academic vocabulary that it contains. And I'll finish off with a few tips for learning academic vocabulary. So let's start with a broad definition of academic vocabulary. We'll have a more specific definition later. So the broad definition is the vocabulary used in academic contexts. And generally this means university, although it can also mean school. And we need to be careful here because there are spoken academic contexts, in other words presentations, discussions, lectures, and written academic contexts, essays, reports and so on. Although there's a big area of similarity between spoken and written academic English, there are also quite a few differences, with spoken academic English including more informal expressions. Mostly I'll be thinking about written academic vocabulary, because reading and writing is the main part of academic study, and most research into academic vocabulary has actually focused on the written form. So one problem with the broad definition we have, the vocabulary used in academic contexts, is that it potentially includes all vocabulary. This includes general vocabulary, in other words everyday words like to, other, about, will, because, number, with, the verbs to have, to be, articles like a, and, the. Surely if we're talking about academic vocabulary, it should be something different from general vocabulary. So this leads us on to a more specific definition of academic vocabulary, which is vocabulary which occurs frequently in academic texts, but less frequently in non-academic ones. So not words like to, or to be, or with, because those occur frequently in both types. When I say text in the definition, I'm considering both written and spoken texts. Now, a potential problem with this definition is that it also includes technical vocabulary. For example, the word enzyme for biology, or ion for chemistry, or turnover for economics or business, or assassination for history. Now, some writers consider technical vocabulary to be academic vocabulary. But most writers consider academic vocabulary to be something different, lying between general vocabulary and technical vocabulary. So let's modify the definition a little. Academic vocabulary is vocabulary which occurs frequently in academic texts across many different subject areas, but less frequently in non-academic texts. So this means words like access, identify, process and method, which are not technical words, but they are used more frequently in academic English than in non-academic English. This classification sometimes goes by other names. Beck, McKeown and Kuchen in 2002 called these Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary. Because of its position between general and technical vocabulary, academic vocabulary is sometimes called sub-technical vocabulary or specialized non-technical vocabulary. While for technical vocabulary, you may sometimes see terms like content-specific vocabulary, subject-specific, or domain-specific vocabulary. So that's a definition of academic vocabulary. Let's move on to look at word lists. So perhaps the most well-known academic word list is the Academic Word List, the AWL, which very much follows this categorization of vocabulary. So just some brief details here. The AWL is a list of 570 word families. For example, for the adjective similar, the family consists of the noun, similarity, the adverb, similarly, and the opposite adjective, dissimilar. So the AWL excludes words from the General Service List, or the GSL, which is a list of 2,000 general English words, like the ones we just saw, to be, to have, a, and, the. It's meant for use in all subject areas and accounts for around 10% of words in academic texts, in contrast to the GSL, which is about 80%, and technical vocabulary generally is around 5%. The AWL is actually meant for receptive purposes, in other words, reading, And this is generally true of word family lists. They are intended for receptive, in other words, reading or listening purposes. This is in contrast to productive purposes, in other words, writing or speaking. The reasoning here is if you know the word similar and you see the noun similarity, you will understand what it means. If you know similar and you see the word dissimilar, you can guess that it's the opposite. But for productive purposes, this doesn't necessarily work. If you know the adjective similar, it doesn't mean you know the noun. Maybe it's similarness, or the opposite, maybe it's unsimilar. You have to learn those different forms separately. So this is fine if you're studying the academic word list for receptive purposes, but it does present some problems in terms of studying academic vocabulary for productive purposes. And this is related to something called the vocabulary shift from general to academic. In other words, recognizing which words are suitable for academic writing and which words are not. Let's see some examples to help us understand this. Let's look at the kind of writing students might be familiar with before they start a course of academic English, namely an email, some fiction, and a newspaper article. So this is an example email. Dear Sir, I'm writing with regard to an increase in your interest payments, so on and so forth. Yours faithfully. So there's a lot of general vocabulary in this email. Some of it's not really suitable for academic English. For example, dear, sir, I'm, your, yours. On the other hand, some of it is. So obviously basic words like an and in. The words writing, payments, faithfully. But there are also some words and phrases which are more common in academic English. With regard to, interest, and increase. An example of fiction. Where are you going? He said. It was a bad thing to ask. So the pronoun you is not very suitable for academic English, nor is going, said, or bad, or thing, or the verb ask. On the other hand, the words where, are, he, it, was, a, and to are fine. And finally, a newspaper article. This is actually a real headline from a real newspaper. Scaling back free COVID tests could hinder UK if new variant strikes, warns health chief. So there are no words there which are not suitable for academic English, and actually some which are more common in academic English than general English, namely tests, hinder, and variant. So the point of those example texts is to show that not all general vocabulary is suitable for academic writing. And the vocabulary shift I mentioned from general to academic English is about two things. First, recognizing which words to avoid in academic writing, and second, understanding more academic alternatives. For example, for bad, we could say negative effects. Thing could be many things, such as factor, reasons, examples, depending on the context. Instead of say, we might use the verb state. Instead of ask, we might say inquire. And some other examples which we didn't see there, the verb see, look for, and idea. So a more formal alternative to see is observe. Instead of the two-word verb look for, we have seek. Instead of idea, we have notion. An interesting feature of academic and also technical vocabulary is that there are some general vocabulary words which have one meaning in general English, but another meaning when used academically or technically. For example, the word discipline, which means training people to obey rules, in academic English means the subject of study. Population, which is the number of people living in a country or region, in academic English means all the individuals who could possibly be included in a study or survey. The word base means the bottom of something, but in chemistry it's a technical term referring to a water-soluble compound with pH less than 7, which reacts with an acid to form a salt. It's also used in linguistics to mean the verb without to. For example, the base of disgust is discuss. And the word summit, which means the top of something, is used in history or other subjects to refer to a conference of high-level officials, for example, heads of government. And the word bug, which is a kind of insect, in computer science means a flaw in the programming system. So general words which have special or technical meanings is something else students need to be aware of. And this detail is potentially lost if general words are excluded from academic or even technical word lists. A different list which overcomes some of the problems of the academic word list is the academic vocabulary list, or AVL. So this is a list of 3,015 words or 500 words in the core list. It doesn't use word families with many different words, it uses what's called lemmas. That's a bit technical, but basically it just means plurals, verb inflections, and alternative spellings. So for the example we saw, similar, similarity, similarly, and dissimilar, rather than being one word family, these are 4 different words. And with similarity, of course, we need the plural, similarities. Another word in the AVL is the verb discuss, plus the forms discusses, discussed, and discussing. And then a separate word is the noun, discussion. And of course the plural, discussions. An important point of the AVL is it does not exclude any list, which means it can include words like discuss and discussion, which are contained in the GSL and therefore they're not in the academic word list, the AWL. Additionally, words are included if they occur at least 1.5 times as often in academic as non-academic texts. The word discuss is actually 1.53 times more common in academic texts as non-academic texts, whereas discussion is 1.94 times as common. In other words, it occurs almost twice as often in academic texts as non-academic texts. Because it's a lemma-based list, not a word family list, it's actually intended for productive purposes, in other words academic writing, not receptive purposes, in other words reading. And the fact that it does not exclude any list perhaps makes it easier for students to recognize general words that they already know, which are acceptable for, in fact which are more common in academic English. Now we've been considering academic non-technical vocabulary which is used across a range of subjects. But the fact is not all academic vocabulary is the same. For example, if we're writing a laboratory report, we're going to be writing about the apparatus, or the procedure, or the errors in the experiment. On the other hand, if we're conducting social science research, we won't be using those words. Instead, we'll want words like survey, population, and sample, which a scientist is less likely to use. But those are the kind of words which are included in general academic lists. As a result, some researchers have developed subject-specific academic vocabulary lists. So these consist of non-technical vocabulary, which occurs frequently in academic texts of one specific subject area, but less frequently in non-academic texts. So I won't go into these in detail, but examples include the business word list, a nursing academic word list, medical academic word list, and economics academic word list. Most of these are modelled after the academic word list. There are some which follow the model of the academic vocabulary list, for example the medical academic vocabulary list, and the computer science academic vocabulary list. Now all of the lists we've seen so far have been of single words. Studying single words doesn't always tell us the whole story. For example, we saw earlier that the word thing is not academic. But a recent study by Granger and Larson 2021 showed that expert academic writers sometimes use this word in various phrases, such as other things being equal, or there is no such thing as, or is the same thing as. It's important in any vocabulary study, including academic vocabulary, to consider multi-word units, in other words, word combinations. Perhaps the most well-known list here is the Academic Collocation List, or ACL. And I've made a couple of videos on this before, so this is a list of 2,469 collocations for academic English. In other words, adjective and noun combinations, verb and noun, adverb and adjective, and so on. For example, for the word similar, which we saw earlier, it's in the academic word list. We have similar approach, similar argument, similar characteristics, effect, issue, pattern, properties, result, situation, broadly similar, and remarkably similar. For discuss, which was in the AVL, we have discuss a topic, discuss an issue, briefly discuss, be widely discussed, previously discussed. While for discussion, we have brief discussion, earlier discussion, fuller, preceding, and previous discussion. Multi-word lists also have some subject-specific academic word lists. An example is the nursing collocation list, which is 488 collocations that frequently occur in nursing journal articles. So for example, I won't read all of these, but these are the examples for the word health. It's interesting that actually only 2 of these, mental health and physical health, also occur in the ACL, while none of the other collocations we just saw with similar, discuss and discussion actually occur in the NCL. And that's of course the reason why researchers develop these lists, because they are more useful for specific subject areas than general academic lists. A few more lists now which I'll introduce very briefly, mainly because I want to refer to them later. First, the academic formulas list, AFL, which is a list of academic formulas, in other words 3 to 5 word combinations. For example, in terms of, at the same time, on the other hand, due to the fact that, it should be noted. It's interesting that those are mostly general words, but when combined together they form academic phrases. Another is the academic idioms list, which is a list of 38 idioms for written academic English or 170 idioms for spoken academic English. Idioms, of course, are a bit informal and therefore tend to be more common in spoken academic English. Examples of idioms from the written idioms list are in light of, bear in mind, and along the lines of. Finally, somewhere between single words and multi-word lists is the discourse connectors list, or DCL. And this is a list of 632 discourse connectors, which are sometimes single words, sometimes multi-word units. For example, however, although, for example, and in addition. Okay, so that's word lists, and we had a little digression there into vocabulary shift and general words with academic meaning. Let's consider now why academic vocabulary is important. Now that we've seen those lists, we can better understand why academic vocabulary is important. One reason is because it's different from general vocabulary. These are more difficult words that learners are less likely to know. At the same time, they comprise quite a lot of academic texts. The academic word list, for example, comprises 10% of academic texts, while the academic vocabulary list is about 14%. A third reason is because academic vocabulary is non-technical. And that's important because technical words, like some of the ones we've seen, enzyme, ion, turnover, assassination, these are ones which the lecturer or the teacher are likely to explain. They are special, they have special meaning in the subject area. But this is not the case for academic vocabulary, which, because of its non-specialist nature, subject lecturers will assume students already understand. Let's look now at an example academic text and try to understand the different academic vocabulary that it contains. So this is an authentic academic text. It's from an economics article. The source is there. I'm going to read it through once, and as I read it, maybe you can try to guess which words or phrases you think are particularly academic, or ones which are maybe particularly technical. It is well documented that women occupy top executive positions in politics and industry much less frequently than men. For example, at the 2014 G20 summit, only 5 out of 58 leaders were female. Around the world, only 17% of government ministers and only 5.2% of S&P 500 CEOs are female. While explanations such as discrimination have been put forward, self-selection, that is, differences in leadership ambition, are likely a major factor behind these gender gaps. Indeed, there is evidence that women are less likely than men to seek to be elected to political leadership positions, and that female students are less likely to run for student government in college. Lawless and Fox, 2008, New, 2014, Kathak and Woon, 2015. Consequently, many corporations, NGOs and colleges now implement leadership training programs targeted towards females, designed to both build women's leadership skills and get them interested in leadership in the first place. So let's look at the vocabulary here. We'll start with technical vocabulary. It's often easy to spot technical vocabulary because while it's high frequency in subject areas, it's low frequency outside of those subject areas. So one technical phrase there is G20 Summit, which is an annual meeting of leaders from the countries with the largest and fastest growing economies. S&P 500, this is short for Standard & Poor's 500, which is 500 of the largest companies in the US. CEOs, which you may be familiar with, is Chief Executive Officers. NGOs is non-governmental organisations. Another word actually part of a phrase, which I think is rather technical, is executive positions. Executive means relating to important people in a company who make decisions. So this is a very common phrase in economics, but probably not so common outside of economics. So those are technical words. Let's focus on academic words, which is what we're really interested in. Let's start with multi-word units. Collocations from the ACL. Well documented is one. Major factor is another, and political leadership is a third. Let's look at discourse connectors, not all of them, but just the ones which are multi-word. So for example, such as, and in the first place. Academic formulas, actually there's only one which is used in 2 places, and that is less likely to. How about single academic words? Well, let's look at ones first which occur both in the academic word list and the academic vocabulary list. And there are quite a few of these. Discrimination is one, selection, evidence, seek, consequently, which is also in the discourse connectors list, targeted, and designed. Words which are just in the academic word list: occupy, gender, corporations, and implement. Words which are just in the academic vocabulary list: so the word frequently, female, which is used in 4 places, explanations, differences, likely, indeed, which is also in the discourse connectors list, and both. So that's actually quite a lot of words looking at different kinds of list. There are collocations, phrases, discourse connectors, and many single academic words. Most of what's left is general vocabulary, simple words. For example, in the first line, it, is, that, woman, top, and in. There's a few difficult words there: politics, industry, government, ministers, but nothing too difficult. So that's an example text. Let's finish off with some tips about learning academic vocabulary. So I've talked quite a bit about word lists, and I would suggest using word lists as a starting point. They help you to understand what academic vocabulary looks like and help you to make that transition from general English to academic English. I especially recommend using an academic word list highlighter or a profiler to see the words in context. Also, don't just focus on single words. You should try to study multi-word units so that you can use the words in combination. As much as possible, try to use the words productively in your speaking or your writing. It's also a good idea to increase your exposure by reading more academic English, or possibly non-fiction. Academic English can be difficult to read, but non-fiction, including subject textbooks, are generally very academic in tone. This kind of reading, called extensive reading, can lead to incidental vocabulary learning, and can help you to improve your knowledge of collocation, and also help you to understand which words are academic, and therefore help you to make the vocabulary shift from general to academic. Building up your knowledge of words in this way is also important, because research has shown that comfortable reading requires knowledge of about 98% of words in text, which takes around 8,000 to 9,000 word families. It's difficult to reach that number just by intentional vocabulary learning alone. I'll actually finish with a quote. This is from an article by Maxwell 2013, and I found it in a chapter on academic vocabulary written by Avril Coxhead, who developed the academic word list. The quote is, "Nobody is a native speaker of academic English." In other words, even native speakers of English need to learn how to speak and how to write academically. And the main way they do this is by reading more academic English and paying attention to the language and the vocabulary that it contains. So that's the end of the video. As always, you can find more information on this topic on the website, EAPFoundation.com. You can also find full copies of many of the word lists mentioned today, as well as vocabulary highlighters and a vocabulary profiler. And as always, there's a worksheet that accompanies this video. Visit EAPFoundation.com/news/social.